Welcome to Horrified Stories, where fear comes to life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Let's start our today's story. The Voice in the Walls, a chilling urban legend. In the heart of a bustling city stood an unassuming apartment complex called Willow Ridge Towers. Built in the late 1960s, its concrete facade and narrow corridors gave it an air of weary neglect. But the rent was cheap, and its location convenient. Its tenants, a mix of students, retirees, and struggling families, rarely mingled beyond polite nods in the hallway. Yet, everyone knew one thing: the building had its secrets. Emma Carter moved into Willow Ridge Towers after a painful breakup. Her new one-bedroom apartment on the 7th floor was far from luxurious, but it was hers. It felt like a fresh start, a place to rebuild her life. The first few days passed uneventfully as she unpacked, filled her shelves with books, and got used to the hum of city light filtering through her thin windows. But it wasn't long before she noticed something odd. At night, when the world outside quieted and her neighbors' footsteps faded into silence, Emma began to hear faint whispers. At first, she dismissed them as the sounds of plumbing or muffled conversations from the adjacent apartments. Yet, the whispers seemed to grow clearer with time. They weren't words, not at first, just soft murmurs that seemed to drift through the walls like a ghostly breeze. She tried to ignore it, chalking it up to her overactive imagination. But by the end of her first week, the whispers turned into something more distinct. One night, as Emma lay in bed reading, she heard it again. This time, it was unmistakable, a voice, low and gravelly, murmuring directly behind her bedroom wall. "Come closer." Emma frowned, her book slipping from her fingers. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the wall, half expecting to see it ripple like water. She told herself it had to be a trick of her mind, the result of too much caffeine and too little sleep. Still, she couldn't shake the unease that settled over her like a heavy blanket. The next morning, Emma mentioned the whispers to Mrs. Gray, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment next door. Mrs. Gray's eyes darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You heard it, too?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean, Ta?" Emma asked. Mrs. Gray hesitated, glancing around the hallway as if afraid someone might overhear. "This place isn't right," she said finally. "Everyone hears it sooner or later, but it's best to ignore it. Don't go looking for answers. Trust me." Emma's unease deepened, but she nodded, thanking Mrs. Gray before retreating to her apartment. She spent the day unpacking the last of her boxes, trying to distract herself from the old woman's cryptic warning. But as night fell, the whispers returned, more persistent than ever. This time, they weren't confined to the walls. The voice seemed to move, drifting from the kitchen to the living room, then to her bedroom, and with it came a faint scratching sound, as though someone or something was clawing at the inside of the walls. Emma couldn't sleep. She lay awake, clutching her phone, debating whether to call someone for help. But who could she call? The police? An exterminator? What would she even say? By the third night, exhaustion and fear had worn her down. Determined to confront the source of the whispers, Emma armed herself with a flashlight and a small hammer. She began tapping on the walls, searching for hollow spots. Her hands trembled as she worked, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. When she finally found a section of drywall that sounded different, she hesitated. The whispers seemed to pulse from the spot, almost alive. She raised the hammer and struck. The drywall crumbled easily, revealing a dark cavity behind it. Emma shone her flashlight into the hole, her breath catching in her throat. At first, she saw nothing but dust and insulation. But then, something glinted in the light. It was a small, tarnished locket. Emma reached in and carefully retrieved the object. The metal was cold and heavier than she expected. She opened it to reveal a black and white photograph of a young girl, no older than 8, with solemn eyes and a braided hairstyle. Behind the photo, someone had scrawled a single word: "Help." Emma couldn't take her eyes off the photograph in the locket. The girl's gaze was haunting, her expression so solemn it sent a chill through Emma's bones, and the single word "help" etched behind the photo made her heart race. Who was this girl? Why was her picture hidden in the wall? And more importantly, what did she need help with? Emma's mind raced with questions as she set the locket on the coffee table and stared at the crumbling hole in her wall. The whispers had stopped, as though whatever force had been urging her to find the locket had quieted, satisfied for now. Sleep was impossible. She spent the rest of the night on her laptop, combing through archives, forums, and anything she could find about Willow Ridge Towers. The building's history, however, was frustratingly sparse. It had been constructed in 1967 and had changed hands multiple times over the decades. There were no major news stories or scandals tied to it, at least none that she could find. By the time dawn broke, Emma had learned little except for one unsettling detail. Willow Ridge Towers had a higher than average tenant turnover rate. People didn't stay long. Most moved out after a year, sometimes less. Why? As the first rays of sunlight spilled into her apartment, Emma decided she needed answers from someone who had been in the building long enough to know its history. She thought of Mrs. Gray and her cryptic warning. If anyone knew what was going on, it was her. That afternoon, Emma knocked on Mrs. Gray's door. It took a moment before the elderly woman answered, her face lined with weariness. "You shouldn't be digging into this," Mrs. Gray said flatly as soon as Emma mentioned the locket. "Some things are better left buried." "I found it in the wall," Emma insisted, holding up the locket. "Someone wanted me to find it." "Ah," whispers. "Stop," Mrs. Gray interrupted, her voice sharp. "You listen to me, young lady. This building is old, and it's seen things that you don't want to know about. I've lived here for 30 years, and I've learned one thing. Curiosity is dangerous." Emma frowned. "You're saying I should just ignore this, pretend I didn't find it?" "I'm saying you should leave," Mrs. Gray said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Pack your things and go. It's the only way you'll be safe." But Emma wasn't ready to give up. "What happened here, Mrs. Gray? Who is this girl?" The old woman hesitated, her eyes darting toward the hallway as though she feared being overheard. Finally, she sighed. "Her name was Lily. She lived here a long time ago. Before my time. She disappeared when she was just a child. No one knows what happened to her." Emma's stomach churned. Disappeared, like she just vanished. Mrs. Gray nodded. "Her parents searched everywhere. The police investigated, but no one could find a trace of her. Some people say she ran away. Others think she," Mrs. Gray trailed off, her expression grim. "Let's just say there are rumors about this building. Strange things have always happened here. Tenants hearing voices, seeing things that shouldn't be there. And Lily wasn't the first to vanish." Emma's skin prickled. "What do you mean, wasn't the first?" Mrs. Gray's expression hardened. "I've said too much already. If you're smart, you leave. Forget about the whispers, the locket, all of it." But Emma couldn't forget. That night, the whispers returned, louder than before. They didn't drift aimlessly through the walls. This time they came from one specific place, her bedroom closet. Heart pounding, Emma approached the closet with a flashlight and the locket clutched tightly in her hand. The air felt heavier, colder, as though the room itself were holding its breath. She opened the closet door, half expecting to see something waiting for her in the darkness. But the closet was empty, just a row of clothes and a few cardboard boxes. The whispers, however, grew louder. They seemed to emanate from behind the closet wall. Emma ran her hand along the plaster, feeling for anything unusual. Her fingers brushed against a small crack near the floor. Without thinking, she grabbed the hammer and began chipping away at the wall. The plaster crumbled easily, revealing another dark cavity. Inside, she found a bundle wrapped in yellowed fabric. The whisper ceased the moment she touched it, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. Emma unwrapped the bundle carefully, her breath catching when she saw what was inside. A small, stuffed rabbit. Its fur matted and discolored with age. Its button eyes stared up at her, and around its neck was a tag that read, "Lily's Bunny." The air in the room seemed to shift, the silence pressing down on her like a weight. And then she heard a faint, childlike giggle, soft and distant, yet unmistakable. Emma's blood ran cold. The giggle echoed faintly, a sound so small yet so unnervingly clear that Emma dropped the stuffed bunny in shock. It landed on the floor with a soft thud, and the oppressive silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. She spun around, scanning the room with her flashlight. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No response, only silence. Emma crouched to pick up the bunny, her fingers shaking as she tucked it into her bag. She needed answers. The locket, the bunny, the whispers all pointed to Lily. But what had happened to her, and why was she still here? The next morning, Emma visited the local library, determined to uncover the history of Willow Ridge Towers. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Karen, raised an eyebrow when Emma mentioned the building's name. "You're the second person this week to ask about Willow Ridge," Karen said, tapping her chin thoughtfully. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Who else was asking? A man, maybe mid-40s. He didn't say much, but he seemed agitated. Said he was researching the history of his family. "Why do you ask?" Emma hesitated. I've just been hearing some strange things in the building. Karen gave her a sympathetic smile. Well, you're not the first to say that. Let me pull up what we have. Karen disappeared into the archives and returned with a stack of old newspapers and microfilm reels. Emma spent hours poring over the materials, uncovering a grim and disturbing pattern. The first article, dated 1971, was about a fire that had destroyed a portion of Willow Ridge Towers. 2 tenants had died, and though the cause was ruled accidental, witnesses reported hearing screams long after the flames were extinguished. The next article was about a series of disappearances throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s. Tenants, mostly children, had vanished without a trace. The police investigated, but no leads ever surfaced. Each disappearance was marked by whispers. Residents reported hearing faint voices in the walls, always in the days leading up to someone going missing. Emma's stomach churned as she pieced together the building's dark history. Every 10 to 15 years, something happened: fires, disappearances, or strange, unexplained phenomena. And each time, the whispers were there. Finally, Emma found an article about Lily, dated 1983. It was a brief report about her disappearance. The photo accompanying the article was the same as the one in the locket, the solemn little girl with braids. But there was no mention of the locket, the stuffed bunny, or any personal effects being found. Lily had vanished without a trace, and her parents had moved away shortly after. The more Emma read, the clearer it became. Willow Ridge Towers was cursed, and the curse revolved around Lily or whatever had taken her. That night, Emma sat in her apartment, staring at the objects she'd uncovered. The locket, the bunny, the articles. She felt like pieces of a puzzle, but she couldn't see the full picture. Exhaustion weighed on her, but she couldn't sleep, not when the whispers might return. Around midnight, they did. This time, they weren't soft or faint. They were loud, insistent, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. Some were low and guttural, others high-pitched and frantic. They seemed to come from everywhere, from the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. Emma clapped her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside her head now, pulling her thoughts apart like unraveling thread. "Help me," one voice pleaded, childlike and fragile. "Get out," growled another, deeper and angrier. And then, rising above the others, a scream, high, piercing, and filled with raw terror. Emma stumbled out of bed, her heart racing. The locket and the bunny seemed to vibrate where they sat on her coffee table, as though reacting to the chaos around them. "Stop," Emma screamed. "What do you want from me?" The voices fell silent. For a moment, the apartment was eerily still, and then, from the closet, came a single, deliberate knock. Emma frowned, her blood turning to ice. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a slow creaking sound as the closet door inched open. She didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to leave the building and never come back. But something deeper, a morbid, irrational need to understand, forced her to turn toward the closet. A figure stood in the doorway. It was small, no taller than a child, its form obscured by shadows, but its presence was undeniable. Emma's throat tightened as the figure stepped forward, the dim light revealing a little girl in a tattered dress. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and black, and her braided hair hung limp over her shoulders. "Lily," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. The girl tilted her head, as if considering the question. Then she raised a hand, pointing toward the hole in the wall where Emma had found the bunny. Before Emma could react, the girl dissolved into mist, her form dissipating like smoke. The whispers returned, soft and mournful, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of sorrow. Emma approached the hole cautiously, her flashlight beam illuminating the dark cavity. She reached inside, her fingers brushing against something hard and metallic. Pulling it out, she found a rusted key. It was old and heavy, with intricate engravings on the handle that looked almost like runes. Emma stared at the key, a chill running down her spine. Whatever this key unlocked, she was certain it held the answer to Willow Ridge's curse and the truth about what had happened to Lily. But some doors, she realized, were never meant to be opened. Emma sat in the middle of her apartment, the rusted key resting in her palm. It felt heavier than it should, as though the weight of decades of secrets pressed against her skin. The whispers had subsided for now, leaving her in an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional groan of the building's old pipes. She had no idea what the key opened, but deep down, she knew it was connected to Lily and to whatever dark force lingered within Willow Ridge Towers. Emma's first thought was to check the basement, If there was a hidden room or locked space in the building, it would be there. She armed herself with a flashlight and the key, slipping the locket and stuffed bunny into her bag. With every step she took down the stairwell, the air seemed to grow colder, heavier, until it felt like she was wading through water. When she reached the basement door, she hesitated. It was an unassuming metal door with peeling paint, but the atmosphere around it was suffocating. Her hand shook as she pushed it open. The basement was dimly lit, its concrete walls damp and streaked with grime. Rows of old storage units lined the space, each one padlocked and marked with a tenant's apartment number. Emma scanned the room, her flashlight casting long shadows that seemed to shift unnaturally. In the far corner, she spotted a door she hadn't noticed before. It was old, made of dark wood, and it didn't match the rest of the building's utilitarian aesthetic. The rusted key seemed to hum in her pocket as she approached it. The door had no handle, only a keyhole. Emma hesitated, her breath fogging in the frigid air. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to throw the key away and never look back. But she couldn't, not when she was so close. She slid the key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism groaned, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air grew colder as Emma descended the stairs, the flashlight's beam barely cutting through the pitch-black void. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing louder with each step. They surrounded her, overlapping voices of fear, anger, and sorrow. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a cavernous room that seemed impossibly large for the building. The walls were lined with strange symbols carved into the stone, glowing faintly with a pale, sickly light. In the center of the room stood an altar, its surface covered in deep gouges and dark stains. Emma's breath caught in her throat when she saw what was behind the altar. Rows of small wooden chairs were arranged in a semicircle, each one occupied by a figure. They were children, their bodies pale and emaciated, their eyes hollow and black. They sat motionless, their heads tilted unnaturally to the side, as though listening to something only they could hear. In the front row, a single chair was empty, and on the altar lay a photograph's same black and white image from the locket. "Lily," Emma whispered. The moment she spoke the name, the whisper stopped. The children turned their heads in unison, their hollow eyes fixing on her. Emma frowned, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, a new sound emerged, a deep, guttural voice that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. "You shouldn't be here." Emma spun around, her flashlight trembling. A shadowy figure loomed at the edge of the room, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. It was tall, its presence suffocating, and its eyes burned with an unnatural light. "What do you want?" Emma demanded, her voice shaking. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, and the children stood from their chairs, their movements jerky and unnatural. They began to advance toward her, their hollow eyes locked onto her with an unsettling intensity. Emma stumbled backward, her mind racing. She reached into her bag and pulled out the locket and the bunny, holding them up as if they might protect her. "Lily," she shouted, "I'm here to help you." The children stopped. For a moment, the room was eerily still. Then, from the center of the group, a small figure stepped forward. It was Lily. Her braided hair was disheveled, her dress torn, but her expression was no longer blank. Her hollow eyes were filled with something else, a desperation. "Help me," Lily whispered, her voice faint but clear. The shadowy figure roared, the sound shaking the room. The symbols on the walls flared with light, and the children cried out, clutching their heads. Emma knew she didn't have much time. She ran to the altar, clutching the locket and bunny tightly. "Lily," she shouted, "I have your things. Tell me what to do." The symbols on the altar began to glow, their light growing brighter with each second. Lily's figure flickered like a dying flame, her voice weak but insistent. "Break it," she said, pointing to the altar. Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed a chunk of stone from the ground and brought it down on the altar with all her strength. The stone cracked, the glowing symbols shattering into fragments of light. The shadowy figure screamed, its form unraveling like smoke in the wind. The children collapsed to the ground, their bodies dissolving into faint, glowing orbs that drifted upward, vanishing into the darkness. Lily's form began to fade as well. She smiled faintly, her hollow eyes softening. "Thank you," she whispered before disappearing completely. Emma stumbled out of the basement, her body trembling and her mind reeling. When she reached her apartment, the whispers were gone, and for the first time since she moved in, the air felt still peaceful. The next day, she packed her things and left Willow Ridge Towers without looking back. She didn't know if the building's curse was truly broken or if it would return in time, but she couldn't stay to find out. As she drove away, she glanced at the locket, resting on the passenger seat. It no longer felt heavy. Inside, the photograph of Lily had changed. The girl was smiling now, her braids neatly tied, her eyes bright. Emma smiled back, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in decades, Lily was free. If you like this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share and subscribe the channel. Help us grow. Thanks for watching.